I'm Troy Reynolds.
And I'm Tricia Cave.
You're about to go on the educational record.
Welcome to the Educational Record, a YouTube series where we grill candidates on Texas state offices about their positions on key educational issues so you can make an informed decision.
And as you make that informed decision, we hope that you'll join us in block voting. If you don't know what block voting is, stick around. We'll get to that later in the video. Right now, we'd like to welcome today's guest, Pat Ledbetter. She is candidate for State House District 68. Is that correct, Pat?
Yes.
Okay. And Pat, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak up with you on one of my favorite topics, education. I appreciate what you do as well. I think teachers have a lot more political influence than they're willing to exercise. And I appreciate an organization that's trying to help maximize that impact.
We appreciate that. Let's go ahead and take that and go straight into our question. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I suppose if I were asked to describe myself, my first descriptor would be teacher. I've been teaching for over 50 years, and I grew up in a family of teachers. My mother was a teacher for over 40 years. My sister was a teacher. My husband was a teacher, and now my son's a teacher. In fact, he's doing the most difficult of all teaching jobs, I think, in working with emotionally disturbed children. And I'm very proud of him for selecting that career option.
So, that takes a special personality for that.
It does. I've taught at all levels. I've taught at public school level, junior high and high school. I've taught in the university when I was a grad student, and I've also taught most of my career in community college. In fact, I was thinking with the COVID crisis, the shutdown from March till now is the longest period of time since I was 6 years old that I wasn't either in a classroom or standing in front of one.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. I don't know if it's the longest for me, but it's pretty long.
Yeah.
And I miss it.
Okay. Yeah. Give us a little overview of your philosophy of public education.
Well, I'm a historian as well as a teacher. I teach history and humanities. And so I think my public education philosophy is grounded in my understanding of U.S. history. In 1776, we declared, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. I think education is our best chance to live out that ideal and that dream. Education is what makes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness possible. And Americans have never been committed to equal outcomes, but we have been committed to equal opportunities. And our public school systems are what make those equal opportunities possible. They can be better realized, always they can be better realized, but the chance for doing it lies with our public schools and our public higher education as well.
So, Pat, as you know, Texans for Public Ed, and for our viewers who aren't familiar with us, we will say T4PE. That's our shorthand for Texans for Public Education. T4PE rates candidates as unfriendly, neutral, or friendly. We know what that means to us, but what does being friendly to public education mean to you?
Well, it certainly means not being neutral. I was deeply hurt when I was labeled neutral. Anyway, that's okay. What being friendly to education means to me is supporting policies that will make it possible and make it better, always improve it. It means paying teachers what they're worth. It means, which is a lot. It means funding public education at the highest possible level, and most important of all, it means treating our public educators with the dignity and respect that they deserve, and listening to their input and including them in making policies that impact what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just to follow up, I don't want you to feel bad about being, most of our new candidates end up neutral before they end up getting revoted. So You can barely miss it and still be neutral. It's a matter of where the votes fall and how many votes we have. So don't feel bad about it.
And just a quick explanation, not just for you, but for our viewers, the way those ratings are set up, you think of it like a bell curve. And so friendly is the GT end of the curve, the 3 point whatever percent of people in the world that it is. Being neutral is not a bad rating at all. But she's right. And a lot of that comes from two things. Our membership is wary of people who don't have a voting record in office a little bit. And also they've been burned not by you, but by politicians who run on supposedly education-friendly platforms. And then once they get into office, they're a different person. And so they're a little wary on handing out those kinds of ratings. It takes a lot. Okay. So, but for those that are watching, she is running for a ratings challenge right now. We'll see how that comes out.
Thank you.
Okay. Give us an idea of what you see as your top 2 or 3 issues in public ed.
Adequate funding is number one. And I think everything depends on that. I believe I think the most important role that the state legislature plays is funding education. That's the number one job. And I think that I know I will take that part of my job very seriously if I'm elected. So adequate funding. I think Texas ought to be in the top tier of funders. We are, after all, one of the richest states. Why aren't we endowing our schools with those riches? Why aren't we using those riches to build better and sounder public schools? Secondly, I think teacher pay is really important to me. I think that we don't value our public school teachers enough. I think their worth has been demonstrated in this crisis when we found out how much public school teachers do, how much society as a whole depends on them. When we have schools feeding hungry children, we see they play more of a role than just the schoolroom. And when administrators were going out and having to find ways to get their students connected to the internet so that they could do online education, it seems to me that would have been the state's job and the state's function to take care of problems like that, not something that had to fall to the public school teachers. And I know that when I had to go online in the middle of the spring semester, I was working very hard, and people would say really silly things like, I guess you're enjoying your time off. Well, no, not really. You see it as having time off to have to adapt so quickly to a new environment. So I think teachers deserve to be richly rewarded. And also the public respect. I guess that's really important to me. I feel, as a college teacher, I feel that we've lost a lot of the respect that the public used to have for teachers, that our input doesn't seem to be as significant to me. As I lobbied with the legislature for the community college teachers. I don't know if you call it lobbying, but I go to tell our story and to try to convince them that we deserve adequate funding. And I don't feel that they really respond to our needs and really respect what we have to say. So that's one of my main objectives in the legislature would be to convince the legislature that teachers are amazing human beings.
That's one of the foundations of creating this group, is that thought process right there. Is matter of fact, one of the sayings, we haven't said it in a while, Tricia, but is first they must fear us, then they will hear us. To have a loud voice with votes.
Like that. I like that.
And it looks like teachers and public education advocates, because we're not just about teachers, we're Texans for public ed. And it looks like they're becoming more activated about the subject. I agree with you. I'm disappointed in how little voice we have had in the past. And I'm very happy to see it increasing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, my mother taught for 40 years. She never made a lot of money, but she was one of the very most respected people in my community. People looked up to Thelma Spencer. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that for teachers anymore. Not like in my youth.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's a loss of trust in institutions generally that's plaguing our society. It seems that we don't have the confidence in one another that we used to have. Now, I am pleased to, I just read a survey today that said 77% of Texans trust their teacher. I don't know of any other group that scores that high. And 70% think they deserve more money. So my question is, why isn't the legislature responding to what appears to be the public sentiment?
That's a good point.
I want to say that I really feel that most, like you said, generally the public does respect teachers. I feel like there's just a very vocal minority, and they're extremely vocal, and they get out there and their messages spread, and we've got to work to combat that.
Well, and
I agree with
being self-reflective, I would take this one shot at us at public education, and then I'll move us on to the next question. And that is, if we've done anything poorly, it is controlling the conversation and getting the news of the good things that public education does. Shout out to Scott and Leslie Milder at Friends of Texas Public Schools with their mission to do that. We've done a very poor job of branding and of advertising the good things that go on in every single public school in this state. And we need to do a better job of that.
Somewhere along the line, people bought into the narrative that the public schools in general were failing, even though they didn't believe that the public school their children was in was failing. Everybody else's school, it seems to be failing. So we haven't controlled the narrative. You're right. Somebody else is controlling the narrative, and I don't know. I don't know where it's coming from, but I think we have the capacity to turn it around for sure.
One place it's coming from, and one part of that oppositional narrative right now is about local control. The state has taken more and more power, and we see that happening, especially through TEA and the commissioner. What is your viewpoint on where is the balance between state control and local control, and how do you accomplish that?
That's an excellent question. I don't have magic solutions for it, but I agree with you. I have been amazed that conservative Republicans who claim to so value local control seem to have no problem with centralizing control of education. To me, like I said, it's how we achieve life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that's done at the local level. Our local communities value their schools. Our local communities believe in their schools. And they want their schools to do better. My daddy served on the school board for years. I didn't mention him. He was also in education. He was the one member of my family that wasn't a teacher. But he valued education so deeply and so profoundly. He took his duty on that local school board as a sacred honor and a sacred duty. And I think it's the school doesn't have to educate our children. It's the foundation of our community. Has traditionally been the foundation of our communities. And I think when the state takes control away from the local school board, they're not just messing with those kids, they're messing with the community. And that community, that's what gives a community cohesion. We can disagree we can be Democrats and Republicans, we can be liberals and conservatives, we can be whatever, but we come together when it comes to our schools. So to me, we need to restore a lot of the local control. We need to get back to making the schools the center of the community. Same problem I have with the charter schools, incidentally, because that's a big problem I have with the charter schools, because it's that local community elect that school board, and they elect that school board to serve their children, and everybody values that. So I would definitely shift much of the control back to the local community. And I think the state has some role to play in evaluating progress and so forth, but in terms of decisions for that local school, I think it should come from the local community.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-up questions, specifics?
No, I think you answered that very completely. I appreciate that. Tricia, do you have one?
Okay, no. So all politicians say that they love public education at election time. However, a lot of the education community, teachers in the public community, are tired of empty platitudes. What concrete moves would you point to in your plan that are more than just campaign fluff?
Number one, the main thing I would do, I'd listen to teachers, and I would listen to public school administrators. I would seek their input, and I would use their input to explain to my fellow legislators what really matters. I am sick and tired. No, I'm sorry. I am unhappy. I am unhappy with the thinking that somebody has made $1 billion in computer. Now they know all about public education. Or somebody who is a highly successful financial consultant that hasn't darkened the schoolhouse door since he graduated and doesn't have a clue what's going on. So the first thing I do is listen to the teacher, and I would seek their input, and I would include them in designing policies. But what else was it? Is that what?
Just anything concrete that you want the viewers to know about from your plan?
Oh, I would redirect public money out of charter schools and voucher systems, and I would make our public school system truly public again. I think that's one of the main places where public schools began to lose some of the cohesion that they had, is when education no longer seemed to be a public good, but it was a private interest. It's all about how well is my child going to do, not how well will all of our children do. And I think the temptation of vouchers and charter schools to fragment the public school and to introduce competition. I don't believe competition plays. Everything I know about education is collaborative. If I have a technique that works in my classroom, I want the whole world to know about it. I'm online sharing it with all my friends and colleagues because it's about all of us succeeding. And when you pit schools against schools and you have a race to the top or whatever, then you're making people think more in terms of just what's going to benefit me and those closest to me instead of what's going to educate all of our children. So that's one concrete thing I would do. I would not fund that aspect of education in the direction it's going out. For one thing, they spend an enormous budget on advertising, so of course people think they're successful. They hire really good marketers, so they get to control much of the narrative because they've got the money to market what they do. Public schools haven't been in the marketing business, so that's something else concrete I would do. I'd also advocate for more the state taking a larger share of the funding of public schools. It seems as property values have gone up, the state share of what they put into public schools has gone down. They've used the money to offset the increase in revenues that come from higher property values. They've used that to decrease what they spend on schools. That's not fair. And besides, I think it's hidden from the public. I don't think the public is aware of that. And also when the state funded a bailout for the financial crisis back in 2011, then the state, I guess they did all the same thing they did to the colleges. They used the stimulus money that was supposed to go to recovery. They used it to balance the budget, and we didn't get the funds. And they're doing the same thing now, that they're taking money for the COVID relief, and instead of upping the money that goes to public schools, they're using that to balance the budget, which I think is not well known.
So I think you have pretty much just answered this next question, but to make sure that you've had an opportunity to cover it all, politicians in general love sound bites where they talk about public education is broken. You hear phrases like pipeline to prison and things like that. I don't concede that. I mentioned I think we don't do a good job of telling people the good side of what we do and the good things that are happening that far outnumber the bad things. But for the sake of argument, let's concede that for just a moment. What's broken and how do you fix it?
The way the state funds it's broken. The way the state supports it is broken. The way the state hands down mandates that drive costs up for administering public schools, but don't do anything for the classroom teacher and the students themselves. So I would put more of that money that goes into meeting state mandates that are not grounded in any sound public policy, in my opinion, quite often. I'd put more of that money back into actually educating students and reduce the number of state mandates, reduce the number of restrictions, reduce the burden that they put on public schools, and then say, oh, well, you're broken. Yeah, we're broken because we took $1 million. I don't think there's anything broken about the teachers I know. Public school teachers are the most dedicated people I have ever had any contact with. And I've dealt with public school teachers both as a teacher myself and also with our dual credit programs, and I know how much they care. And also, there's several things I do for the teachers. One, I give them more time for planning. Because when you teach, what do you teach?
I'm an administrator now. I was a theater and English teacher when I was in the classroom.
Okay, and what do you
And
teach?
I teach high school. I teach all high school social studies.
Okay, well, you have a planning period. Did y'all have planning periods? How much actual planning and grading did you do in that time? Public school work is way too hard to have to take it home every evening and every weekend. And to me, you need some more time at school for planning. To me, that was critical to me when I was in public schools.
Right.
And also, I think we need to keep class sizes small, because to me, education is as much about relationships as it is about imparting information. Mm-hmm. And you can't have a close relationship with 30 first graders or 25, even 25 first graders. And you can't teach a high school student how to write. A high school student who's fallen behind with their writing skills needs close personal tutoring and close help. And you can't do that with huge classes. So, and you can't do it online either, incidentally. Not very effectively.
Okay.
I saw something that Secretary of Education Voss said about how she hoped that this crisis would improve public schools because they were stuck in a rut and they were inflexible. Well, I think that public schools are pretty flexible and pretty adaptable. Whatever I've seen teachers make tremendous adaptations. And you put one lesson plan on the board and that doesn't work. You change your direction, you change your approach, and you do something that works. You got to be so flexible. You can change in 5 minutes based on what a class is doing and how they're responding. So,
and I'd like to brag on every teacher in the state, including Tricia, who since March completely revamped public education as we know it, with no training, with no extra money, with no resources, just with get it done. And they've gotten it done.
While they fed the kids, and while they expanded internet connection to the 1/3 of Texas kids that didn't have it, which is pretty phenomenal.
And taking care of their own kids at home while they did it.
While they were teaching their own kids at home.
Right.
I
made sure to check in on our rural students, made sure to take care of the kids that needed the extra help and attention. Yep, I could go on and on.
Yeah, I could go on and on too. And I'm at the college level, and it was hard for me. I've taught online, but I've only taught humanities online. I suddenly had to teach my history classes online, and they were designed for face-to-face. Everything I'd planned for that semester was for face-to-face. And, well, in fact, I didn't get started campaigning because I was too busy revamping my classes. So
we literally had a Zoom meeting on. Yeah, sorry. We literally had a Zoom meeting on the Sunday, and then we're expected to move the curriculum by the next Monday. So we had a week.
I'd call that flexible.
Yeah.
And that was our spring break, by the way. So I haven't had a break since Christmas. My spring break was spent building curriculum. My summer was spent doing the training that we should have had in the spring. And here we are.
Right. And how much help did you get from the state on that?
Not much.
Well, the state really didn't even come out with the public health guidelines until 2 weeks before we were ready to start school for the next year. Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
And since then, they've revised it several times. So, okay, let's get back to the last question. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us about your views on public education? Anything we didn't cover today?
Let me think. Just how much I appreciate what public schools do. We didn't cover the STAR test, did we? Did we talk about the STAR test?
We have not spoken about STAR test.
You're certainly welcome.
Well, I have really strong feelings on standardized testing that I really would like to share. I knew there was something. As a college teacher, I think I have seen the end result of such strong emphasis on mandatory standardized tests, because I've seen my students' interest in actual learning, their natural curiosity, diminished, and I think that's a big part of it. It seems to me that when you simply can't measure the magic that goes on in a classroom. You simply can't measure the relationship that a teacher has to a child. And sometimes flunking a child is the best thing that could happen to them if they learn how to do better next time. So, I'm not saying you should flunk a lot of kids, but I think the standards we used to measure, whether you succeed or not, are trying to measure things that are immeasurable. And when what's important can't be measured, what can be measured becomes important. And so we've turned what can be measured, results of a standardized test, into more important than what can be measured, cannot be measured, that relationship and that understanding of what that child needs, or that student at the college level needs at that particular time. I had a stint back in public schools from 2004 to 2005, back when they had the test, and I taught an AP English class. And I loved that class, and I loved those students, and we did such interesting stuff. I had them writing literary analysis and analyzing poetry and so forth. It came time to take the tax test. I had not taught the test, and one of my best students failed it. I was totally humiliated. I hadn't taught him how to write like that. The next year, the principal sent me to a workshop on how to teach the tax test. And I spent 2 weeks. I set aside 2 weeks and said, okay, students, now we're going to learn the tax test. And my students almost rebelled. They said, oh, no, this other stuff's way more fun. I said, well, we have to learn this test. And so I went through all the mechanical motions of teaching that test, and my students all did exemplary. They scored real high on it. First year, they didn't do so well, and I thought they were every bit as successful as they were the next year. But what they were doing couldn't be measured. I think I was teaching them how to love literature. Mm-hmm. Okay, measure it for me. You got a test that didn't course?
I have a good story about that. My kids, whenever I get into the Cold War and then teaching the 1960s, are very interested. They want to know about the Kennedy assassination. Did you know the Kennedy assassination is not in our TEKS? No. So they'll want to ask me questions, and they have interest. And you see it, and then I have to tell them, I'm sorry, guys. All I can do, I have to mention it. We have to move on to LBJ. We've got to keep going. And you see the light go out. They want to learn. But
the light go out. Exactly.
Once you extinguish that fire, it's hard to get it back. They don't want to learn about the Great Society at that moment. They're curious and they're inquisitive about something they're actually interested in, and I have to shut that down. It's horrible. I hate it.
Yeah. I did too. I looked at the standards that you have to meet when I was teaching dual credit history. And I thought these are just compartmentalized, memorize this stuff, memorize this stuff, memorize this stuff. There's nothing there to connect it. There's nothing to show its relevance. There's nothing to make them want to learn. My mother is my hero. And she always said, they may forget what I teach them, but they'll never forget how I teach them. And to her, the most important goal for education was cultivating that love for learning. She believed that if they missed a skill this year, they'll pick it up next year if they still have that zest and that love of learning. And that's what I try to do in my college classes. I try to make them lifelong learners. I want them to get into the subject and see its relevancy and its importance. I know they're not going to remember the election of 1828 when they've been out of college for 30 years. I don't expect them to, but I want them to remember the relevance of that election. I want them to remember the relevance of how history developed, and I want them to learn to think historically, to see current events in context of how they got to be that way. You can't make a test that measures that. So I think we're really doing our students a horrible disservice. Now, tests serve a purpose, but the purpose they serve should be to help the teacher. To help the teacher know what needs to be taught. That they do have certain standards, of course, that they should meet, but the teacher's perfectly capable of figuring that out. Okay.
I will say, shout out to our State Board of Education, which has gotten much more friendly over the last couple of years. They have done a good job of revising some of our social studies standards to make it a little more manageable for us, but it's still. It's tough.
Well, I haven't taught the dual credit history in a couple of years, so I haven't seen the revisions. But I can say I think a lot of the public pressure has made a difference there, and I think that's something the teachers have been able to kind of turn the story around a little bit on is the importance of those tests.
Well, and while we're giving shout outs, a shout out to the group, let me make sure I get this right. It's TAMSA. I refer to them as Moms Against Drunk Testing. Texans advocating meaningful state assessment. They have been the driving force to try and tone down, not get rid of, but tone down the testing, get it into its proper place, which is diagnostic and not punitive, and to try and make sense of it. So a shout out to TAMSA right now as well. That seems like a pretty good place to go ahead and end our conversation, but I do want to thank you. These conversations are the kinds of things that have not been happening, and we need them to happen over and over again with different audiences each time. And that's really kind of the point of this series we're doing, is to get people who want to be the ones making those decisions, talking with constituents, getting the message out about what they stand for, and learning from one another about public education. By joining us, you have helped us with that, and we really appreciate you doing that.
I think equally important, campaigns and elections should be about educating the voters, and they aren't anymore. So I think it's really important that we get our campaigning back to the point where candidates have to outline their positions. They have to be honest. They have to tell voters what to expect if they're elected and what their priorities are. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk specifically about an issue near and dear my heart. Thank you for that opportunity.
And on that note, for the viewers out there, we appreciate you joining us as well. It takes more than one person for a conversation. You are the other end of this conversation. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
As promised, a little more about the block vote. If you've never heard about the block vote, you're not alone. It's a new process that we espouse here at Texans for Public Education. As a group, we analyze the records of candidates and incumbents alike in regards to public education. We then assign a rating of neutral, friendly, or unfriendly to each candidate, regardless of party. All 31,000 members have a vote in those ratings. Once the ratings are set, we use them to unify our vote into one large block of votes. We do this only with state offices. Members are free to vote as they wish for any other office. We do not tell people how to vote. Instead, we come together and make the decision as a group. If you would like to know more about how the process works, please visit our website at texansforpubliceducation.com. We hope to see you on the next episode of On the Educational Record. Bye-bye.